What's up, folks? Welcome back to the stream. It's Tuesday. We are becoming just a little bit more tactical than we were yesterday. Hope everyone is having a good week so far. We're going to talk a little bit about Chaos Demons today. I think beyond kind of the ever-present Space Marine menace that is currently sort of dominating the game right now. The other thing that I think we have to worry about is the other blue faction, that being Tzeentch Daemons. And so far, the results have proven that Scintillating Legion Daemons are overperforming pretty highly. I don't know if, well, obviously our sample sizes up until this point are not particularly large. So obviously this could be a little bit of a small sample size bias, but it is based on my observation, the case that mass Tzeentch Daemons is going to be an incredibly strong army archetype moving on into the future. And that's something that I would like to address. And so what I've done today is I've gone through hundreds and hundreds of results from the last couple of weeks post data slate update to talk about exactly what is beating these demons. So we're going to talk about why they're good. We're going to talk about what's good against them. We're going to talk about some takeaways that we can glean from that data. So that's hopefully you're all ready for a fun time talking about that. In other news, real quick, Captain Con did ask me to talk a little bit about their event. We're going to take a quick peek at their website. January 30th through February 1st, 2026, the first weekend of February, is Captain Con 2026. It is a holistic gaming convention that you can play a bunch of different games at. But most importantly, there is a Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar GT being run by our friends over at Away Games. And you can get 10% off your badge cost using coupon code TT2026 over at CaptainCon.com. I highly recommend the convention, one of my favorite conventions of all time. And they've been nice enough to sponsor many of our live streams for the last couple of weeks, which I really appreciate. So big thanks to them. I'm going to be there. I don't know what I'm doing there yet, but I'm definitely going to be there because it's one of my favorite game conventions, and I absolutely love them. And you can do all sorts of stuff there. You not just miniature games, but all sorts of tabletop games. You can play board games. They have a huge board game library, role-playing games, and you even win prizes by playing the games, which is cool. So, highly recommend those people. Anyway, chance, Scintillating Legion isn't OP. People just aren't used to fighting Tzeentch Demons. Okay. I hope that's the case, chat. I hope that is the case. So, real quick, we will hop in on discussing this problem by talking about the Lord of Change. I think what I want to do here, I might actually, I think I should set this up. I'll set this up later. What I should do is have a little like rules panel on my stream whenever I pull up rules on like 39K or whatever, and then I'll have that on. That's like a little separate showcase. I think that'd be good. But I want to talk about the Lord of Change and obviously the update that it went through. The big thing here is that these guys are relatively efficient. So you're coming in. Current points cost is 270 points. I am a little small right now. Pump that bad boy up so we can see the whole data sheet there. 270 points so a little more than the cost of a Land Raider. You get an 18 wound body with a 4+ invulnerable save. So not the easiest thing in the world to kill. Not difficult by any stretch of the imagination. I don't want to say that these guys are really sort of invincible. However, like they're only T10, so a lot of your sort of medium arms are going to actually do some serious damage to them. High volume attacks, high volume kind of mid-rate attacks is what you want. High strength characteristics, wound rerolls, lethal hits, that kind of stuff in a large volume to get around their invuln save. But the big thing is that invuln save. So the, classic anti-tank profiles where your big AP doesn't really work, right? We're seeing lots of Gladiator Lancers being played in Ultramarines or in Space Marine compositions right now. That kind of stuff is not particularly solid against the Lord of Change. So it requires, to talk about rupture cannons, dark lances, that kind of stuff, that laser beams their way through vehicles like these aren't very consistent because they'll get blocked by the 4+ inbound save. So it requires very specific forms of anti-tank to punch through. In addition, these guys just got a big buff on their weapon profile. They have a 9-shot, 3-damage weapon, which by itself doesn't seem that exciting. It's basically just 3 autocannons stuck together. It's only 18-inch range, strength 9, AP 2, 3 damage, whatever you may say. However, they have an ability built in. They give all Tzeentch demons, including themselves, +1 strength within 6 inches. So it's actually strength 10. So it's actually good into other sort of medium vehicles. The Lord of Change is basically like the world's biggest gladiator, essentially. It's bigger and has more hit points than a gladiator. It shoots more times than a gladiator, but it's like toughest characteristics and, you know, movement and stuff is very similar. In addition, it has this super fucked ability. Now, this ability is almost certainly typoed, but that's one of the reasons that this model is strong. You select one ability in your shooting phase to grant the Bolt of Change. So the Lord of Change doesn't get 2 ranged weapons. It has the Rod of Sorcery, which is a little tiny baby ranged weapon that's AP 1, 2 damage. You can kill 1 or 2 infantry models with that every turn. It is okay. It's all right. It's nice to have. It's a nice little bonus. The big thing is the Bolt of Change. You grant only the Bolt of Change one of these, and it is in your shooting phase only, so it doesn't affect Overwatch. That's an important thing to note. If you see people who are firing Lords of Change and they are gaining sustained D3 on Overwatch, that is incorrect. You do not do that. However, the timing of this effect is very important because it does not say that you must use it when you are selected to shoot. You can use it after you're selected to shoot, even if you are, as long as you are in your shooting phase. So the importantly, you must select the ability and apply it to your attacks before you go into the attack sequence. All of these abilities only activate when you make the attack, which means if you can't, for example, see how many 6s you roll, then try to choose sustained D3, right? Oh, I rolled 4 6s. Sustained D3 would be great here. Too bad. As soon as you pick up the dice to roll, the timing's passed for sustained hits to grant you any effect. However, you can use this after you've selected your target. So one thing that will often happen is you go, I'll activate my unit and I will choose targets for my ranged weapons. It will be your vehicle or your infantry squad. I'm going to target your intercessors that are out in the open. And the other guy goes, I'm out in the open. I'm going to use go to ground to gain cover. You can then say, well, it's my shooting phase, so I'm going to choose that these attacks will ignore cover, and then you move into the roll hit sequence, which is actually super fucked because a lot of times you can counteract your opponent's reactive stratagems with this fix. It's probably typoed because you probably should say when this unit's selected to shoot in your shooting phase, but it's just as in your shooting phase. So as long as you do it before you roll your hits, you're good to go. Pretty wild. It's very, very stupid. Yeah, and they've never updated it. They've updated this data sheet like 3 times. They've never updated this. I don't know, man. It is what it is. So this guy shoots a bunch of times. He has a 3 damage range weapon with a good sequence of keywords, right? I either ignore cover or sustain D3. This ability is a little weird too because the lethal hits is basically never better than your sustained D3, which is a little weird because the sustained D3 is like it's sort of equivalent to sustained hits too, which is generally speaking going to be better with lethal hits unless you're wooding on like 6s, which is almost never the case. So the fact that this has lethal hits on here, I don't know what the if you're winning on 5s, I don't know what the math looks like on lethal versus sustained 2. I actually haven't run the numbers on that, but the math is that generally speaking, and you should know this if you're a Lord of Change player, generally speaking, ignores cover is statistically better if your opponent is benefiting from cover on a significant number of their targets. Sometimes you can manufacture situations where like only a couple models in your opponent's unit has cover, so you don't really care that much about ignore cover. However, the general math says that sustained D3 is very, very marginally worse than ignore cover if your opponent is benefiting from cover. If you can get ignore cover elsewhere, either you can just simply see past cover or you hit them with a ignore cover or cover stripping effect, so something like a burning chariot, you shoot them, then the sustained D3 becomes absolutely cracked. The other thing is that it has a sort of mid AP characteristic. However, there are ways to buff the armor penetration characteristic coming out of this thing's weird beaky nose. In basically every single detachment for Chaos Demons, and I think this is the case for Shadow Legion. I have to double check. I know Shadow Legion can give them ignore cover. So you can just pay a CP to give them ignore cover inside Shadow Legion. I don't think there's a +1 AP strat. But they do have, there is in melee, yeah, for Corn the Demons, yeah. But they do have in Shadow Legion, they have access to Chaos Sorcerer, Terminator Sorcerers, which can give them +1 AP when they Death Hex something. And that's very common because there is a stratagem, the uppy downy stratagem lets you pick one Heretic Astartes and one Shadow Legion demon unit. To up down, and so oftentimes what you'll do is you'll be able for 1 CP to pick up any demon and also your Terminator Sorcerer, and so if he doesn't die, you can just constantly be redeploying him around the table, which is very useful. So you can very easily get AP3 ignore cover on this thing and sustain D3. If you're in Shadow Legion, you can get +1 AP for 1 CP and Demonic Incursion, and then the big one, the main thing today is going to be Scintillating Legion, where you can Pyrogenesis for 1 command point and 1 flux token to get +1 AP and +3 strength. So you can go to strength 13, because remember, this guy always has +1 strength. All the numbers here. Tzeentch is a trickster. He's tricked you on what your stats are. He's actually strength 10 because he has +1 strength baseline all the time. And then +3 strength from the stratagem puts him to 13. So now he's doing things like Land Raiders on 3s. You can be AP3, flat 3 damage, ignore cover if you have a burning chariot, and sustain hits D3. So you add all that stuff together, and suddenly this weapon profile goes from being, oh, it's just 3 autocannons, to being, oh, nope, it's going to one-shot a Titan. It's going to one-shot a heavy tank. For a 270-point body that is is relatively resilient. Now, the big downside is it is only 18-inch range, but it does have a prodigious capacity to blast people. Now, typically, what we'll see is 2 to 3 of these guys inside a list, and there are what I'm focusing on today are lists that are basically spamming Lords of Change, either Scintillating Legion lists, or there are some builds of Shadow Legion that are taking 2+ Lords of Change, 2 or 3 Lords of Change, by themselves, and because they are a ranged attack. And because demons have so much access to either Deep Strike, the entire faction has Deep Strike just on its data sheets, or up-down effects, these guys are not inflicting this damage from like the norm, from the normal direction, right? Where you would expect a weapon profile like this to either be on like a vehicle that's like move 10 on the board and your opponent can counteract its movement characteristic, or from melee where they have to charge. The Lord of Change is simply going to go into reserve or start in reserve and then deep strike 18 inches away from its target, and you're going to be able to stack 2 or 3 of these things onto a single unit and blow them up. So it will basically always alpha strike you. A Lord of Change will almost certainly get the opportunity to shoot at what it wants to, or they can play, if they play a little cagier, they have Bellicor, they can be resilient to long range opponents shooting, and they can clear out your screens for a turn or 2, and then they can go in and they can hit what they need to. So despite the fact that it's very short range, it doesn't have the typical downsides of being a very short range unit where it's oftentimes out of threat range because of its maneuverability, right? It's high base movement and it can teleport. Once it's there, you can probably charge it because it is just going to be next to your army. So in terms of actual counterplay, one important thing is having units that can counterattack whatever the Lord of Changes go into. If you don't have ways to extend their range, which you do in Scintillating Legion if you play with Infernal Puppeteer, but that's only one Lord of Change, and you do in Demonic Incursion if you play with Everstave for +6 range. Unless you have one of those things, which is obviously those are enhancements, they require you to be the only one Lord of Change will be able to do that. They are going to be right next to your army, and you probably can counter battery them. So being able to survive the hit or trade away things that aren't necessarily that important and then come back and actually hit them is a big deal. Engaging them in melee can also be problematic because they will typically, outside of Scintillating Legion, they don't have much to do. They don't fight well. They're only 3+ weapon skill, strength 6, AP 1, 3 damage. In Scintillating Legion, you can pick them up out of reserve, though. And in fairness, this isn't like a nothing profile. It's not like engaging a Land Raider where it's just going to like make these 1 damage attacks at you. He will kill a guy, but he's really only going to kill one guy at a time, and then you're going to pin him in melee, and unless they are paying to extricate him from melee, well, which then requires the Lord of Change like bounces outside 9 inches of you, so it's screenable. He won't be able to retarget onto new stuff, right? Wherever his line of sight is at that time, that's where he's going to be able to see. Because there's no way, to my knowledge, at least, there's no way to fall back and shoot in any of these detachments at all for demons. There's only the pull out of melee and then redeploy from Scintillating Legion. So that's the Lord of Change at a baseline. It's a weird profile, but it's efficient, it's high damage, and it's super high maneuverability. So let's talk for a moment about also the big wings. Yeah, that's a good call too. The Lords of Change are very much like Magnus the Red, where the model is really big. Do I have mine? No. Mine's downstairs. Dang, that would have been good. The model's really big. I could show you the model. If you haven't seen one before, because demons aren't very super commonly played right now, but especially at large, like big table events, right? 5+ round like GTs. For the last 3 weeks or so, the capacity for Scintillating Legion to go 5-0 has been absolutely prodigious. the chance that you go 5-0 with Scintillating Legion is extremely high. And so, while you may not have seen one in the past, I think you will. There's probably one coming up in your future. Let's take a peek at Lord Change here. Grab him. They don't show you the. So here's the miniature anyway. Here's the mini on Games Workshop. They don't show you. There is an alternate build of this model that's important to talk about, which is not pictured anywhere. They just didn't put it on the case, I guess. This is the sword build, and you almost never play the sword. We talked, I think, over the weekend or yesterday about a really funny build that ran Neverblade and took 2 melee weapons because you could take a sword and then he has his staff, and he gets like 9 really solid melee attacks instead of 5 really mediocre melee attacks. But when you're playing the Rod of Sorcery, the technically correct assembly for this guy is actually to have his off arm here be outstretched. So he basically does like a Magnus thing where he's got his big. My Magnus is still broken, by the way. He's been broken for like a year. He's got his big staff that sticks way out, which means when you rotate him, he's got this little rod that gains weird lines of sight. Plus, he's got wings. So he actually gets a little bit of a downside from being large because he's large on like 3 or 4 different axes where it's actually really hard for him to actually like totally hide behind terrain. But it also allows him to poke that true line of sight over the top of terrain features or around the corner of terrain features. And one thing that you'll see is like people will be like, okay, you're move 12 and range 18, so I can like do this and then I won't be able to be seen by this guy. But then the Lord of Change moves and rotates, and suddenly the line of sight that he's measuring from is actually like 16 inches away from his original position because all the little bits of the miniature stick out so far. So very much like Magnus the Red or all these like weird true line of sight, like winged things, the Lord of Change abuses the true line of sight rules in a very weird way that can catch people off guard. It's also important to note that when you're engaged in melee, you can still rotate when you pile and consolidate. No one knows why, but that's what the rules commentary says you can. I think in all technicality, it shouldn't work that way, but Games Workshop decided that they wanted it to. So if you do engage this guy, as long as he's declaring a pile in or consolidate move, he's able to spin around. So he can like be out of line of sight and hiding. You engage him behind the line of sight blocker to hopefully hold him there, and he just consolidates to peek his like stick around the corner, and then he shoots you anyway. So there's a lot of weird idiosyncrasies to keep in mind with this model. Don't forget as well that he is just a monster, so he'll just shoot you if you're in melee too. He'll have to do it during his shooting phase, and then that's the shooting activation, but he will eventually just kill the stuff engaging him for sure. So that is a big discussion about exactly why the Lord of Change is good. Let's talk about what's actually beating this guy, this big, silly idiot. Faced him with Kroot the other day. Puppeteer blasted him off the board. 2 Riptides, popped everything. Did grand total of 8 wounds. Yep. That is the quintessential demon experience. You go, aha, your anti-tank has committed. It is time for my anti-tank to shine. And your opponent goes, I made all my saves. And you're like, this sucks. This is the stupidest game ever. Why am I playing this? That is the quintessential demons. That's the demon experience. So, the results of my review here will not surprise you. The staggering, I guess I have the, I could just like show you the actual document that I put together. The highest, I should put this in an Excel sheet or something, but the army that won the highest proportion of games against Scintillating Legion or Lord of Change focused demon armies was Ultramarines. What a shocker, chat. That included several RTTs, at least 3 different Lords of Change lists last night. Ultramarines. Space Wolves was also a follow-up, a runner-up there, as well as other varieties of Space Marines, Blood Angels, Hammer of Avernii. And there's also a little bit of additional sort of heavy infantry-based lists like Custodes that also were seen to take them down, as well as Auxiliary Cadre Tau. Now, I want to focus very heavily on one aspect that all of these things share, and that is, importantly here, 4 wound models for an army that essentially gives its entire ranged platform 3 damage. It seems like the immediate answer is stuff with more than 3 wounds. So let's, for example, make our merry way over to the Crossroads 40K tournament. This is my old stomping grounds, chat. Over in Maine. And we saw a big win. In fairness, I did look up the results of this particular game. It was Tau going first with Auxiliary Cadre. And Auxiliary Cadre has a bunch of support for things like Rampagers. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. There we go. It looks a little bit better. So, if you're going first with this style of army, you can put a lot of board pressure onto a demon army because you have so many scouting things that are able to sort of take this table space and prevent them from being able to teleport around everywhere they would need to go. In addition to that, none of these Kroot units are very easy for the Lords of Change to sort of easily kill. The Rampagers themselves are 5 wounds each, which means they get 2 shot by Lords of Change, which means it's unlikely. They're also toughness 6, so importantly, Lords of Change do not wound them on 2s unless they have a strength bonus involved. I don't know if there's any. I don't think there's any defensive stuff in Auxiliary Cadre. I guess you give them like 18-inch load up, but that doesn't matter. Their gun's only 18-inch range, so it doesn't make a difference. But you are fast. You're able to sort of push the board early, and then it takes multiple activations from a Lord of Change to kill these units. And these units are generally going to be trading down to. So like a triple Lord of Change build or a double Lord of Change build is going to take 1 to 2 shooting phases to actually kill these Screwtack Rampager squads, which means you just get to activate multiple times with the Riptide Battlesuits. If you don't, the Rampagers just charge you. And the important note that we had earlier is that Rampagers do have basically a perfect profile dealing with these guys, because we don't care about AP, first of all, and they're only AP 1, but that doesn't matter if we're fighting 4+ invulnerable save guys. In addition, Rampagers swing 4 2-damage melee attacks with sustained hits 1. They're strength 6, so they wound on 5s, and then you could give them full wound rerolls in Auxiliary Cadre. So, if you don't deal with the Rampagers will kill you. And the Rampagers are really inefficient for the Lords of Change to kill, which means that suddenly you get to activate multiple times into them with Skyrays and things like that. In addition to that, you're also just like pushing so much up the board early, right? These Rampagers are going to be running up. They can scout, they can move, they can advance and charge in this detachment, potentially come in with the rerolls, and then you can prevent your opponent from being able to be as maneuverable as you want, right? If you're engaging them, they now have to spend CP to get out of melee. And if you've taken a lot of the board with little units like Crude Hounds and things like that, then they can't necessarily come in a spot to attack your Riptides. So you can use the low range of the Lords of Change against them by simply physically screening out the actual big guns that they want to be shooting at, right? The Riptides and the Skyrays and things like that. Skyray Gunship's also a good answer here because they get hit rerolls against the Lords of Change. Although their attack volume is not super big, so it's not a immediate win, but it is very efficient because they don't really need any bonus like attack roll bonuses. But a Lord of Change does need to kill these eventually in order to actually be able to win, because eventually they will get knocked down by these units. And they can't do that if you simply screen 18 inches in front of them, right? If you put your screening unit, and they don't have Lord of Change or Infernal Puppeteer or Everstave, if you put your screening unit so that it is 9 inches from the Skyray, then by definition, 9 inches in front of that is going to be 18 away, which means if a Lord of Change naturally deep strikes and isn't in Demonic Incursion, then they cannot shoot the Skyray without any help, without some sort of help. They need additional bonuses. So if you're able to have this this massive number of like recon drone pathfinders, right? Infiltrate scouts over here that are like relevant in melee, infiltrators, scouts, a bunch of stuff that can absorb the middle of the table. You can make it so that they simply can't attack your backline. They have to activate into these like inefficient profiles that they don't really want to fight, that are going to take multiple hits to kill, and then you get to shoot them again, which seems pretty good. So, in addition to that, the other thing that we can notice here, basically, the thing that like most of these have in common is that weird wound characteristic, that non-3 wound characteristic. Ultramarines, obviously, are is Terminators actually? There's a Terminator each of this list. There's an actual Terminator Assault Squad, but also Victrix Honor Guard. I mean, look at that. That's 16 4-wound infantry with -1 to wound effects, which, so I don't care about the strength characteristic. Oh, your strength is 10. Cool, man. That's so exciting. I'm friggin' -1 to wound all the time, so you just wound me on 3s. Assault Terminators. There's also a Hammer of Avernii list in here, which is also going to be focusing on Assault Terminators. So like, yeah, here we go. Terminator Assault Squads. You get Iron Front, or excuse me, Steel Front on a Terminator Ancient. So he respawns Terminators back into the Terminator unit. So you have this unit that's high armor save, can Armor of Contempt, which can defeat the relatively low AP value of the Lord of Change. If they aren't buffing their own AP in some way, then you probably force them to either ignore cover, so their damage output drops, or you can force them down to AP 1, in which case you can be saving on 2s or 3s against them, and you don't take that very much damage at all. It takes 2 conversions from a single Bolt of Change shot to kill a single Terminator, and then the Terminators start respawning. So they are difficult for Lords of Change to activate into. So what's very interesting is that like 90% of these lists that have consistently beat Scintillating Legion or other similar Lord of Change spam armies are all bringing this exact defensive profile. 4 wound, like melee, sort of kind of aggressive melee infantry. These guys can scout too as well, so they can take a lot of table space. They're not as fast as like crew-attached rampagers, right? Their move characteristics lower. They can't advance and charge, but they can push forward and then move and then charge. If you give them the opportunity to get into something early, they can take a lot of board space and just force you to deal with them. And you can only pump AP on 1 Lord of Change at a time if it's a stratagem. So it's you can eat the invuln saves from 1 Lord of Change, maybe take some casualties, but then AOC the second one, and you're probably at a pretty solid spot. You haven't taken too many. Your unit survives. You get to shoot the Lords of Change again, and you just keep going. Redemptor Dreadnoughts, also a pretty solid profile against them. That 2+ armor save is a big deal against only AP 2 weapons. And then Lords of Change, by definition, are firing 15 fixed damage attacks, which means -1 damage is very good against them, right? You're not -1 damaging something that's shooting 3d6 plus 3 damage shots or whatever, where the -1 damage doesn't really come into play. It's a million 3 damage shots, which means you're cutting damage by a third. So the Redemptor Dreadnoughts are very resilient. They almost certainly don't die to a single attack. Oops. Close my list here, chat. They almost simply certainly don't die to a single attack. And I don't know if that's what we were playing with our Blade of Ultramar over here. But there's a similar through line to a lot of these lists. Some more Ultramarines at the SSG RTT, running. This one had Eradicator squads, which is funny. Running Victrix Honor Guard, Stormraven gunship, -1 damage. So we're seeing a pattern. -4 wood infantry and -1 damage vehicles is the way to go. Oops, excuse me. That's a Space Wolf list. And then in addition to that, Battle of the Boardstorm, I think also very similar stuff. Redemptor Dreadnoughts, mass Victrix Honor Guard, fucking 15 Victrix Honor Guard. So it is a little unfortunate, but it does seem like the thing to keep this unit down is the other really strong unit in the metagame right now. Essentially, to beat the blue birds, we have to become blue boys, I guess, because it does seem like Ultramarines are the most consistently defeating Scintillating Legion. Now, I will also say that there is a little bit of a bias here in terms of the statistics. Which is that Ultramarines are very popular right now. And so the chance that you hit an Ultramarines player is much higher. So we are going to be looking at a disproportionate number of Ultramarine wins, but that's largely because I think Ultramarines have a high play rate. I will mention, however, that there are a couple of instances of Scintillating Legion also losing to Space Wolves. And Space Wolves are doing a very similar thing. It's almost universally Saga of the Great Wolf. Space Wolves do have a lot of board control. They have a lot of early game push from things like Wolf Scouts, if that's what we're playing. Head Takers, Terminators, no. But they do have forward operators and things like that. They can pin a demon army on turn 1, and then they force multiple. Look at this, chat. 4 wound infantry down their opponent's throat with -1 to wound. So essentially the same defensive characteristic, also good against these guys. Now, the Wolfguard Head Takers are a little bit dicier. They're very good in melee, assuming you can give them a wound characteristic or wound bonus. The downside is their strength 5, which does bump up against toughness 10 really badly. However, basically like a single activation from a Lord of Change wipes that whole unit because they're 3 wounds at that point, and they don't have a good armor save. You're almost certainly taking double weapon rather than the shield. The shield can keep them alive for a little bit, depending on how good your saves are. The double weapons, though, is what you need to actually punch through them. They're devastating, which is pretty solid, but the real downside is that as soon as they commit, they're immediately going to be killed. The Wolfguard Terminators don't have that problem. They don't hit super hard because it's a lot of strength 5 weapons with no wound bonuses, generally speaking. However, you could use them as a bunker for Arjak Rockfist, and he actually kicks the shit out of these things. So the longer you can keep Arjak in melee, and he's going to be very difficult for a Lord of Change to extricate, because, I mean, if you're playing Scintillating Legion, you're not going to kill him in melee. Outside of explicitly the Neverblade, like Demon Prince could maybe epic challenge him and have a reasonable chance of killing him. However, or Bellicor if you're playing Bellicor. Outside of those particular instances, Arjak Rockfist is simply going to continuously stand in melee for basically half the game. And activate probably 3 to 4 times into Lord of Change, and each one of them is worth probably on average somewhere around 6 damage. So he himself will actually end up killing them over a long enough period of time. You also have tools in this particular faction like Logan Grimnar, and you also can do something similar with like Uriel Ventress in Ultramarines, where you can demons don't tend to react very well to being command point taxed. Logan Grimnar can be difficult to kill because he's a high armor save unit. It takes 3 conversions from a Bolt of Change to kill him. So there's a non-zero chance that one Lord of Change with no buffs actually doesn't do enough to kill him if he's in cover, because they have to choose ignore cover. If they spike a little bit low on 1s and or you like reroll an invuln save, you probably live through one Bolt of Change. which means you get to project your command point cost increase further. That means that Scintillating Legion has a tough time picking up out of melee. They also have a tough time using Pyrogenesis to buff the stuff that's in the middle, right? The Lords of Change in melee or the Neverblade Demon Prince. If they have Infernal Puppeteer, usually they can keep the Infernal Puppeteer guy outside of the aura. But the downside is that as soon as they get locked into melee and then you Logan the unit, there's no timing in which the Lord of Change can pull out of that engagement without being taxed on the Delirium Unmade to redeploy from being engaged. So Logan's almost certainly going to tax at least one command point and probably more. And demons in general, Kairos Fate Weaver does do a little bit to assuage command point problems, but demons in general live or die on command points, and being able to tax them in the center there is really obnoxious. So he's also a huge deal. So these Space Marine factions, between Space Wolves, between Ultramarines, to a lesser extent Iron Hands, have a lot of really, really good tools at dealing with this particular profile. Now, the other thing is that there are some other kind of like options we can use to sort of ape this. We talked about Tau. What's interesting is that I saw at least one instance of them getting dumpstered by Adeptus Custodes. This is at Winter Store Championship. This was actually at Tabletop Nexus, I believe, where I've live streamed before. Some of their GTs. If you have Presidium Shield Custodian Guards, and it looks like they did actually sprinkle Presidium Shields into their Custodian Guards. Well, oh my god, this is so great. This is all 6 Custodian Guardsmen. It's just 30 Custodian Guard. Oh, chat. It's in Shield Host as well for the critical 5-ups. Ooh, okay, yeah, I can see that being spooky. Custodian Guard are an interesting they're an interesting kind of like double-edged sword to Lords of Change, because first of all, they do die in droves to Lords of Change. Lords of Change are very close to being perfectly statted to kill Custodian Guardsmen. However, sprinkling Presidium Shields into your Guardsmen makes it a little weird for Lords of Change to kill you, because a Presidium Shield basically just adds a full Custodian Guard into the unit against exactly the Lord of Change's offensive output, because he adds an extra wound, right? So you have 4 random 4-wound guys standing in your units. In addition to that, Custodian Guard shooting is actually not terrible into Lords of Change. They are only strength 4, so they wound on 6s, but you're wound rerolling most of the time. And then your low AP characteristic doesn't really matter, and every conversion's 2 damage. So each time a Custodian Guard unit shoots, it's probably good for between 2 and 4 damage on a Lord of Change. When you're considering you're doing that 12 times because you're shooting with 6 units and Sentinel Storming them, you almost just straight up kill one of them in your first shooting phase, just with random gunshots, right? If you just burn all your Sentinel Storms, you've killed a Lord of Change. In addition to that, any of the Custodian Guard that do get there, which is tough, in fairness, you have to fight through all the screens. You have to get into melee with these things, and they're constantly just blasting at you. And every single conversion outside of the shield guys will just straight up kill a Custodian Guardsman. So I'm not going to say it's super easy. However, once you do get there, the Custodian Guard are generally speaking high enough OC characteristic to take the objective out from under the Lord of Change if they don't have a bunch of idiot like other demons standing around, which means that you're going to be able to get wound rerolls really easily, especially if you have the Vexilla still in the unit. It only takes 2 Custodian Guards to take an objective away from a Lord of Change, which then gives the whole unit wound rerolls. And then like 5-up critical sustained hits, wound reroll. It goes like they go so ham. The Caladius Grav Tanks are a solid example of a weapon profile that the 4+ invulnerable save is really weird into. If you spike them, it can be really bad, but it can go either way. The Grav Tank's toughness isn't super high, and there's a non-zero chance that as soon as one Lord of Change just gets like Pyrogenesis, it just rips an entire Grav Tank off the table. However, it's not a trading battle that the Caladius really want to get into. So they're not like they're very strong against things like a Lord of Change, but they aren't necessarily the like be all end all of anti-tank, right? You would really want to be getting the Custodian Guard into melee. However, they're not terrible. We have Inquisitor Draxis, who's another good example of solid shooting. I believe that she's a strength 6 weapon, right? Which is also then going to be winning on 5s. Yeah, her Psychic Tempest is strength 6. So when she Sentinel Storms, she's actually probably good for like almost 4 to 6 damage by herself. Which is super spooky. She probably just hands you 12 hits and what is that? 4 reroll, 4 wounds, like 6 wounds on average. So like 3 go through, 6-ish damage with the Tempest alone. Even more if she rolls any 6s with her devastating wound gun. So you have a CP tax in this list. You have good shooting that's good specifically against that like low armor save, invulnerable save, protected wound characteristic. And then you have these weird 4 wound infantry that don't die to a single gunshot, and they absorb 2 gunshots before you can you actually lose a guy. So this would, on the face of it, I was very interested when I saw that the factions. I hadn't gone through all the lists yet, but I was interested. When I saw that, I was like, oh, Custodes like really solidly won the matchup at one point. I was like, I wonder why that happened, and it looks for sure like we were able to get a bunch of shooting in early, absorb a lot of the counterattack from 3 damage weapons. Maybe we get a Caladius Graph Tank activation that goes really well, right? We just like hand 3 saves in and the Lord of Change spikes really low, and then you put a billion damage through. That could certainly happen. But also you might just kill a Lord of Change with the Draxis, right? And then suddenly, like as soon as the Lords of Change come out to fight, they do a little bit less damage than they expect, and you get to do massive damage into them, and the game's over. Despite the fact that if they just got to activate uninterrupted into like these, especially the non-shielded Custodian Guard squads, things just go really poorly. But if you lead with the shield guys, right? We have 2 shields in 1 unit over here. We lead with these guys, so your opponent really doesn't want to have to interact with them. And then you rapid ingress in these guys, then things go. You can go. It can be pretty nice. It can look pretty sweet. From their chat, we had a couple of idiosyncrasies. There was a Blood Angels result where Blood Angels won against them. These were sort of one-offs. So obviously, all sorts of things can just happen in a game where it's not necessarily like we can't look at the list compared to the other list. Blood Angels do just like they push really hard, and if you're playing a defensive Scintillating Legion build, you could just be pushed off of primary and just die. I will say that against a lot of these profiles, outside of explicitly Lamarties, Lords of Change are like so excited to activate into like baseline Space Marines. This is actually a profile matchup that was really bad previously, but prior to the data slate, but now is really good because they had a random damage characteristic. So there was a 1 in 3 chance they just simply didn't kill you when they hit you with their weapon. Now they almost automatically kill a Death Company Marine every time they convert, and they're probably converting, if they're like bonus AP, ignore cover, they're probably converting like 5 of those per shooting activation. So each Lord of Change is killing like 5 to 6 Space Marines per shot, which is just like you get in with so few models that a lot of times you do just fall apart pretty quickly. This was playing, let's see, just a bunch of jump pack captains. Chaplains with jump packs really strong, plus Lamarties. Lamarties is good because he gets hit rerolls plus lethal hits for his unit. So his unit actually slaps really hard. And then the chaplains have a baseline +1 to wound. So whatever surviving is going to do a ton of damage. The dangerous part is if you like engage a little light and then don't get in with a lot of stuff and threat overload what the Lords of Change can do, they can pick you apart pretty quickly. I imagine in this case, we ended up just being able to stage and then hit with like a bunch of units all at once. The Lords of Change can like, with their powers combined, blast like one thing to death, but then eventually you get to like 2 activations into them and you can kill everything. I don't know if it's necessarily quite as, what's the word? Quite as, reliable, because all of your defensive profiles are just prey to what these guys are doing to you. But you are good at punching them. So assuming that you can get in or you can withstand the first hit, things will be good. I guess outside of explicitly Lamarty's unit, because Lamarty's unit's -1 damage. So their damage goes from 3 to 2, and then you can 5 up Feel No Pain in Rage Cursed Onslaught to keep your guys alive like 50% of the time. That is good defensive technology, and Lamarty's is kind of a problem for that. they need to deal with Lamarties with something else. Like if they have the Neverblade Demon Prince, they can like send him in to just to kill Lamarties out. It is very helpful. But the Sanguinary Guard squads, basically I'll just like die to a single activation, especially if you pump AP. And like I said, you're killing like 5 Death Company on average each shot. In addition to that, there was also a little bit of a, let's see, I think a couple times they lost to Chaos Knights. No, maybe not. I think I had one game where they died to Chaos Knights. Chaos Knights depends a lot on whether or not they have Be'lakor in the army. Be'lakor can keep you alive from long range shooting long enough for you to be able to come in and activate multiple Lords of Change onto a single despoiler, but it really comes okay. It really comes down to whether or not you can get like 2 to 3 Lords of Change shooting a single knight, because that's what you need to kill them. Only one of the Lords of Change is going to be high enough strength to win them on 3s, unless you're also playing Khorne Demons, or excuse me, Nurgle Demons inside the list. But a Knight Despoiler, on average dice, if it's fully powered up, one-shots a Lord of Change. So you need to like have Be'lakor so that you aren't necessarily just dead to towering from a really long way away, and then you need to be able to like redeploy up and then shoot the despoilers and kill them. The problem is that you're also wandering into all these carnivores and stuff, which aren't going to kill you in melee, but they will engage you and do enough damage that you have to then shoot the carnivore to kill it. You'll kill the crap out of a carnivore easily with a Lord of Change. However, that's a turn you're taking off and not fighting the despoilers. Then the despoiler gets to shoot you, and then it's all over. If the despoilers get like a full unimpeded activation into a lot of these lists, they will just fall apart really quickly, because the despoiler will like just immediately remove the threat to itself as soon as it shoots. There is a lot of dice involved. Obviously, the despoiler can spike low because it doesn't have rerolls or anything in Infernal Lance. You're just hoping to roll a bunch of sustained hits, essentially, or a bunch of lethal hits. Against the Lord of Change profile. But if you roll enough lethal hits, their low AP isn't that big of a deal, because you're just saving on 4s, and they usually hand you so many that you take like 14 damage on average to the Gatling cannon alone, and then they shoot a million little stubber and missile launcher shots at you, which probably kill you. It's a really bad profile matchup. I think you're shooting 36. You should get like, the average is 6 lethals, right? So you're immediately handing them 6 saves, and then you're missing 12. So you hand them another 6 just to natural damage. So they should take 12-ish from just the Gatling cannons. And then if they convert like they probably hand you 1 or 2 more from the stubbers, and then if they convert a missile launcher shot, you're probably dead. I guess so. So it's coin flippy. It's probably more likely that the Lord of Change survives, but it probably does not survive very much, and it probably does not survive enough to last against all the random shooting from the War Dogs. Yeah, that one feels like it's probably a tough time without really strong frontline melee to actually deal with this stuff. And I do wonder if we see eventually that like Scintillating Legion does have a problem with armies that can put so much pressure on them. Like the forward momentum of this list is crazy, because you can shoot all the War Dogs, but every single War Dog you shoot at is just like more night activations they're getting that are unimpeded, and eventually they'll just have enough to kill your Lords of Change and the game's over. That's a really interesting list. That's that one does seem pretty tough. And then they did lose to Chaos Space Marines at one event, which I think was cool. Abaddon the Spoiler, Vashtor the Archifane. Is this Hellbrute combo? No Hellbrute. Nobody has any respect for the Hellbrute anymore. Oh, we're playing. This was Pax Bound Zealots, by the way. But we're playing Warp Talons. Warp Talons actually not too bad into them. You can like pray for lethal hits and then put enough rerolling attacks through on them that you might kill them. It is a little scary though, because you do have to survive through the shooting. If they like get the drop on the Talons, they're going to kill them. And the same for the possessed units. However, you do have indirect fire from the Obliterators. You could, with full rerolls, that you can potentially rock up. right? Because you can get Abaddon for rerolls and then just like drop 2 Obliterators within 24 and like brutalize a Lord of Change if they don't come out to engage with you. And then if they do, you get the full power Forge Fiends. The strength 12 Forge Fiends with lethal 5-up critical sustained hits for Mark of Nurgle. Plus rerolls from Abaddon, extra strength from Vashtor. And so they like each of these has a pretty good chance. Plus they're devastating, so they punch through the invuln save occasionally. So the chances that they can put a bunch of damage into a Lord of Change is pretty high. It's not guaranteed for sure, but it is a scary proposition. Predator Destructors are also kind of okay against them too. If you can get lethal hits on them or a +1 to wound effect. The downside is we're just sustaining here, but they are shooting so many AP 1/3 damage shots. Like the AP low AP doesn't make a difference, so you're looking at just a bunch of 3 damage attacks, which is pretty good into the other Lord Change profile, which is very funny. Now with that, chat, those are my thoughts about the matchup. So I think that the key for what I took down here, looking through all of these matchups, is that it's that 4 wound breakpoint, which makes a ton of sense. Defensive characteristic, like defensive attribute bonuses. So things like -1 damage, -1 to wound. High armor saves also tend to be very good. If you're 2+ armor save, access to armor, contempt, stuff like that is strong, and command point taxes are also strong. So that's why I said earlier that I don't know if the results of this particular like study will necessarily surprise you, because it turns out that the army packing almost entirely 3 damage weapons does die to the 4 damage, the 4 wound infantry brick. But I think it's interesting that it does. I think it comes out pretty cleanly in the results here. Space Wolves, Assault Terminator, Space Marines, Ultramarines just seems like they're pretty solid in the matchup. And we'll have to see as well if any other armies can find a way to do that. If Scintillating Legion does become a problem, we have this like Tau Auxiliary stuff. There are other examples of weird wound characteristic infantry bricks in the metagame that could potentially also see some play. On top of that, it also seems like just very aggressive lists, like between the Chaos Knights and the Blood Angels can also put enough pressure on these guys that you do either bully them off primary, or you are just able to engage with enough of your melee units that you can kill them by the end of the game. Now with that, one thing I wanted to talk about was some of the builds for Scintillating Legion. I think the Scintillating Legion builds are a little bit less exciting, to be perfectly honest. I don't know if anyone is like shocked by a lot of what we're playing. Usually it's 2 to 3 Lords of Change, 1 Demon Prince, maybe Be'lakor. However, we did have another list that popped up that was sort of Scintillating Legion adjacent. See if I can grab the list here. In a couple different places, a very similar list was being played around with, and it's this Shadow Legion build. So this was I looked through a lot of RTT results. This was a 2-1 in an RTT. Ended up losing to the Blood Angels list. But it's this double Lord of Change build. And as I mentioned before, there's a couple benefits that we have for Lords of Change in this detachment in Shadow Legion. So this is obviously the Be'lakor detachment, where it has a separate detachment ability based on what your keyword is. Bloodthirsters get advanced charge. All the Khorne demons get advanced in charge. Lords of Change get -1 to be hit permanently against all attacks, which compounds their already pretty solid defensive characteristic. So they can actually play kind of aggressively with that, because suddenly, like another 10 to 20% of your attacks are missing and not doing anything, which means the classic counter to these guys, which is something like, for example, those Infernal Lance Despoilers that are shooting 36 times with stuff that's like winning on 5s, lethal hits, have a bunch of keywords on it for 2 damage, is those will typically be high volume but not have a lot of rerolls. As soon as you cut another 17% out of that, immediately the output of that unit drops pretty incredibly. So this is it's interesting because it compounds the defensive technology that the Lords of Change have. You also have an ignore cover strat, and you can take The +1 AP guy, although it doesn't look like we're doing that in this case. Oh, that's cute. We have raptors. It's cute. What's interesting about this is that it's not running Be'lakor. It's running only Bloodthirster with Fade to Darkness, so he can go into reserve after he fights. We have the Lords of Tzeentch who can kind of bully the middle of the table with their shooting. Again, they're probably going to either start in reserve or start back and then redeploy up to get shots. You can play them like in a lot of terrain setups. You can play them sort of towards the middle of the table, behind a mid-board line of sight blocker. And then because they're move 12, they could usually get an angle to shoot around the middle. But they're not playing like a normal gun unit where they're like off in the corners. They want to play sort of in the center so that they can move to get line of sight to something. And then you can always redeploy one of them if you need to for a command point. We got Fiends, Fleshhounds for utility, and then a bunch of Screamers. The Screamers don't have any inbuilt synergy with the Lords of Tzeentch. The Lord of Tzeentch Strength Aura doesn't work on non-ranged attacks. However, the Screamers also get -1 to hit. So this is like an old build where sometimes you could play it with a Curse Cultist. It looks like we're not doing that today. We're taking the guns instead. But you're basically just like locking down the midboard with 18 dudes with 3 wounds, right? So 54 wounds with a 4+ invuln save and -1 to be hit. That you're also backing up with a lot of utility. You have these Raptors that can deep strike. The Raptors also force battle shock checks, which is kind of neat if you are in Demons, because Demons will Shadow of Chaos the center of the table if they hold enough objectives. And as soon as you start charging Raptors into things, you start killing people as if they fail battle shock checks against you. So there's a little bit of synergy there, but they're also just kind of difficult to kill utility units. So between these guys, and then all these guys, we have so many utility that we are essentially going to be able to play these as cagey as possible without having to expose them to get anything done, because we have so many fast-moving little units everywhere on the table that you're able to score out very consistently. And then as soon as anyone comes out to engage with you, suddenly you have these Lords of Tzeentch that can peek out from that midboard hiding place, or they can redeploy in and just like get 2-on-1 Lords of Tzeentch into one big heavy tank or a big brick unit, and you can blow them away. The Bloodthirster also can sort of feed into that game plan too, because as soon as he charges something and kills it, he goes into reserve, and then you can rapid ingress him and do it again the next turn. He gets really creepy if you never fail to kill your target. So you have to choose good targets for him, but if you do, then he can go pretty wild. So there were multiple players who played a similar list. I think there was another one that I wrote down. Maybe I didn't take it down. But I know at least one of these other ones was another similar version of Shadow Legion. They're obviously a little bit. That's a very similar in terms of the units, the unit composition to Scintillating Legion. It's not quite the same as Scintillating is, because it has a greater melee output, right, with the Bloodthirster and stuff. However, a lot of the stratagems carry over. You don't have the high strength characteristic you do in Scintillating Legion. You have better melee instead, but you still have redeploys. You still have the Screamers, which you will typically take in Scintillating Legion as well. So your utility and your like ground units look very similar. But instead of like the Neverblade Demon Prince, who's cheaper, you get this expensive Bloodthirster who's more effective. So I don't know. It's interesting how close those two compositions are together. But with that, chat, I think that's all I had to talk about for Chaos Demons today. Did anyone else have anything that they wanted to discuss before we sort of wrap up the video here? I do want to give a shout out as well. We just put it on the schedule, but there is going to be a live stream over on Twitch. As is tradition, post my Twitch link in the video description over there. Which will be Deathwatch versus Eldar. That's going to be T5S2 Pod Finals game. That's tonight at 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, so that's like 5-ish hours from right now. Now just got to break down Thousand Suns with them. We'll see how Thousand Suns do with them. I would be interested to see if Thousand Suns end up playing Lords of Change in a big way. I think it would be cool if we could redefine the Thousand Suns faction, because they're very much struggling right now. I think it's pretty clear. And the Lords of Change, like, being a big wound pool that you can cast Kabbalistic rituals from without really being like, it's kind of a disaster once you start failing Kabbalistic ritual tests with your like rubric marines and stuff, because you start physically like just losing models, right? As soon as you do that. But Lords of Change have a high enough wound count that if they can cast Kabbalistic rituals for being near a Thousand Suns person, then failing is not the end of the world. It's not quite as bad as it is for a marine caster to do it. So I don't know. They also get huge benefits from the rituals as well. You know, any rerolls on them goes crazy, which is why the second reason, in addition to protecting from shooting, that you see Bellicor in a lot of this list is just because like reroll ones on a 2+ weapon scale thing with a million critical effects is just incredible, right? It's so consistent. If you can get, for example, sustained D3 hitting on 2s and you destined Destiny's whatever it is, the thing to get full hit rerolls on the target, you start to fish for sustained D3, and the Lord of Change damage output shoots up incredibly. So if you like can combo all of the Kabbalistic rituals on one target, it's really good. But you do lose like the extra strength and stuff that you would get from other detachments. So I don't know. We'll see. Any tips on running Swarm Invasion? You can watch my How to Play Getting Started with Tyranids video. That's like, that talks a lot about the like basic tactics to play like high model count invasion fleet. There's a little bit of obviously like there's like units in there that you would typically you would that are coming out of starter product and stuff that you wouldn't necessarily, if you were like going to hyper optimize the list, you wouldn't necessarily play. But a lot of the basic stuff is there. Typically, you want like, I would say like 60 to 80 infantry plus a Turvagon, and then you back it up with like every single gun is essentially how it goes. You're like 2 Tyrannofixes, triple Exocrine, I think is the typical. Kairos with rerolls. That does sound good. You have to get line of sight to the target with something anyway to get the rerolls, but it's not the toughest thing in the world. Anyway, chat. Oh, the Shaman. Yeah, Shaman's good. Shaman's underplayed, honestly. I think I don't know. The Zangor Shaman, I guess they upcharged him for a while, which was unfortunate, but the Zangor Shaman was like the best data sheet in the Codex when it came out, for sure. and then people realized it, and it was like, oops, we should probably make that guy a little bit more expensive. Anything interesting with Plague Legion? Yeah, a lot of people playing Plague Legion. I don't know. There's a lot of like Plague Legion results because I went through basically every single demon player who played in competitive 40k over the last 2 weeks. I think there was a lot more pure Khorne and a lot more pure Nurgle than I expected there to be. I don't think I didn't take down any like top placing results or anything because I think they were mostly like 2-1s or whatever in RTTs and stuff. So I don't have any like particular results to report, but it is the case that a lot of people are giving all of the different demons a try. The one thing that I haven't really seen is Legion of Excess come back after they recently buffed Keepers of Secrets down to like basically being free. It would be interesting to see if that detachment actually had some play in it. But I don't know. I'm curious. Carnifexes are cheaper now. Natural Force make them worth considering outside Crusher Stampede. We did talk about one list that tried really hard to make them work and ran like 6 of them, I think, in Subterranean Assault. And without Old One Eye, I believe it was 3 units of 2 without Old One Eye, which is like pretty wild. It seemed fine. I think they did like 3 and 2, but with high tiebreakers. I think it's like acceptable. 150 points. They're 150 for 2, right? 150 points for the brick of stats you get out of those guys. Yeah, or 180, excuse me. 180 for like just the raw stats, right? It's 18 wounds or 16 wounds, toughness 9, blood surge, with like a million shooting attacks and like high strength, high AP melee, which is something Tyranids don't do otherwise. It's pretty interesting. I still think, I don't know, it feels a little, because they're difficult to actually like impact with. I would be hesitant to play them outside of Subterranean Assault. But in Subterranean Assault, they seem serviceable, at least. That's what I would say. Buffed keepers are better in incursion. Are they? I don't know. Like incursion needs high base characteristics, because it doesn't have any way to buff itself outside of +1 AP, which you don't really need on Keepers of Secrets, obviously. And it doesn't necessarily need high movement characteristics either. So I don't know 100% know. I wonder if there's like there's probably not a build that like combos Nurgle and Slaanesh, because I think Great Unclean Ones and Keepers of Secrets just like want to operate in the same board space. But I don't know. Great Unclean Ones next to Keepers of Secrets make Keepers of Secrets seem so sad. Like they're so much faster and they have more attacks, but Great Guos are like so much harder to kill. And their strength characteristic is like actually reasonable. That I don't know. Plus they have army support abilities. I don't know, chance. I do just love Great Unclean Ones. I think I'm hyper Great Unclean One build, but we'll see. See how things end up shaking out. I'm a little bit worried about. I guess the one thing that we could talk about if we wanted to is if we see any changes to Lord of Change, which I actually, I would actually not be too surprised if we did see the data sheet get changed. There's a scuttlebutt that says we might be looking at a balance fix in the next couple weeks, and I wouldn't be super surprised. And honestly, I would prefer this data sheet. I think the 270 point cost is a little low for these guys. At the damage characteristic, I think it was like they were like 260 before, which I think was too high at D3 damage, but at flat 3 damage, it feels maybe a little low. You could probably push them at 280 or something. The other thing too is that I think this ability should be reworked to say when you're selected to shoot, choose one, and they and they get that, and it should be sustained 1 instead of sustained D3, so they can use it on Overwatch, but it's not an automatic selection in 90% of cases that you choose sustained D3. Plus it drops their total damage like spike, because they get really spiky on damage, which is very frustrating, because sometimes they'll shoot and they'll like fail a bunch of times, and you'll be like, well, that sucks, that's too bad, I rolled bad. And sometimes they'll roll 5 6s to hit and then generate another 12 hits, and you're like, holy shit. And then they just like one shot a night or whatever, and I don't like that. I think I get it's like funny and Tzeentchian, but I think sustained hits 1 definitely feels a lot better than the D3. I think those would be very, if they needed a quick fix to this data sheets, we'll see if it ends up requiring it, but I think those are the very easy changes to make, which would be cool. It's probably to handle Victrix. Yeah. The scuttlebutt that I heard is that their Victrix are going to 3 wounds. In which case, this a lot of the premise of this live stream gets immediately thrown out, because I get to talk about how good Ultramarines are into Lords of Change, and then immediately they make Victrix Order Guard an absolute prey to Lords of Change. Hopefully, if they make a change that drastic, they will also change this data sheet, because I do think that does like spike these guys in a lot of situations. But we probably end up going back to, I think you still take like 1 Victrix Honor Guard unit to go with Marnius Calgar, if that ends up happening, and then you probably go to like vehicle focused Ultramarines, like the old like Josh Roberts Gladius Task Force version, which was like, Gilliman, Calgar plus like 5 or 6 tanks. That's probably just fine. Please let Victrix go to 3 wounds, sincerely Head Takers. Just because it would make Head Takers feel better. It doesn't make Head Takers any better against them, right? But it does make Head Takers feel less silly. It's weird right now because there's so much of the faction that Victrix Honor Guard straight up invalidates because of their inflated characteristics. Like Blade Guard veterans, like if I wasn't trying explicitly to attach like a non-captain character, like, why would I ever take a Blade Guard veteran if I was playing Ultramarines? Like, there's this other guy that just has more wounds and attacks and -1 to wound and stuff for not like a crazy inflated cost. I was like, yeah, that's weird. It's a whole thing. Yeah. Anyway, give other Marine units C+ saves. Well, so I don't know if what we should be doing is buffing other Marines. I think, like, the funny thing is that, like, the worst of Space Marines is still, like, pretty good compared to a lot of the rest of the game. I don't know if what we need to be doing is putting a lot of other Marines to Victrix Honor Guard levels. I think that's might be the wrong direction to go in. Everyone else is like, well, how come Victrix Honor Guard get to do it and not me? And you're like, well, because Victrix Honor Guard are too good. If we buff the whole game to be Victrix Honor Guard levels, we're just back to 9th edition, which, listen, was really fun. But I don't know if we want to go through the, like, 3 years of balance updates required to make it a fun format before they immediately scrapped it for 10th edition. If you want to run 2+ saves, you have to turn in your armor contempts. I'd take that. That might be okay. Also, all right, here's the deal. You ready? You have to turn in Armor of Contempt. You get a 2+ base armor save, but 2+ armor saves never benefit from cover. That's the trade-off. Would you take it? And to get rid of Oath +1 to wound. Oath +1 to wound is I don't know. It's Ultramarines shouldn't have it for sure. I think that's very clear. At least in their current format, right? In their current form, Ultramarines, and I would say also probably Salamanders. I would say Raven Guard, but Raven Guard got hit so fucking brutally in the last data slate update that I don't know if I would say it for them anymore. It did fail very oppressive when Raven Guard had the +1 to wound oath, because, like, the fact that they, like, Vanguard veterans would just kill you with shooting attacks was like, what the fuck's happening right now? But I'm not sure Salamanders should have it, in my opinion. As a Salamanders player, I think it might be too much. They're not even highly played, but the faction is actually broken. If Ultramarines got removed tomorrow, Salamanders would probably be in, like, top 5 best factions of the game. It's not even particularly close, I don't think. But as soon as you take it away from, like, Hammer of Avernii and, like, Emperor's Shield, those whole armies just dissolve. Like, they're basically constructed around +1 to wound oath. So, like, you have to keep it on the really, really terrible Space Marine sub factions. But I definitely think it's the case that the ones that with a million special units that are all really good, probably the +1 to wound goes way too hard. Anyway, Chance. Just get rid of Oath of the moment. You just don't get an army roll anymore. You get a They Shall Know No Fear. You get an extra. You get +1 to battle shock checks. No, I don't know. I don't know about that, chat. I think that's too far. I don't know. At that point, we're just like, hey, we're just redesign the entire Space Marine faction, which maybe they do need. Like, honestly, probably the case. But it's probably going to happen in 11th edition or whatever. But I don't know if I would be calling for them to just simply, like, have their entire faction ability reworked at this late stage of the edition. Anyway, chats. I think that I'm gonna go ahead and hop off probably. Base Space Marine armor save should be a 3+, and Terminator equivalent, or it should be a 4+, and Terminator equivalent should be a 3+. You're speaking my language now. More death in 40k. Make people explode when you shoot them. My favorite thing. I do think that would be very bad, though. I think that is a lot. I guess if you're 4+ save, but you get, like, unrestricted armor of contempt or whatever, like, sure. Then it's basically just a 3+ save. But I don't know if I would give the whole faction -1 save. Feels like a lot. All right, chat. I'm going to go ahead and hop off. Don't forget, everybody, to go check out Captain Con. Link in the video description. You can get 10% off your badge cost by using coupon code TT2026 over there. I hope to see you at that event. And I'll see you over on Twitch in, like, 4 hours or so. We're gonna watch some 40k. It's gonna be a good time. So I'll see you over there. Tomorrow we should have a Salamanders video out. We'll talk about getting started with Salamanders, and I will probably, by tomorrow afternoon, I will probably have a members video talking about my Salamander build, which I think is really good. I don't know. I think Forge Father Seekers is very strong, and I'm excited to talk about it. So, anyways, chats, that's going to be all for me today, folks. I'll see you later, everyone. Remember to keep it classy, folks. Have happy wargaming. And have a wonderful rest of your day until you come hang out with me on Twitch, which is I know you're, of course, going to do.